Real talk, real people, real radio. HighFrequencyRadioNetwork.com.
I want to read something from The Matrix and You. This is real good. This is dated 2009, and it's and I'm gonna read this to you. And it's real interesting. It says, during my 12 years service as a judge, I always insisted on the truth and placed justice above law and order. I could have prepared this article indicia of a research paper. However, people tend to lose interest when articles of this nature become too technical. Science has taught us that for every action, there is a positive reaction, cause and effect. If your life on Earth resembles a matrix, it is because you're seeing things for the first time with eyes wide open, but you feel confused. That feeling of confusion is appropriate because the information you're now digesting contradicts much of the information you've been spoon-fed throughout your life. I named this paper after the movie The Matrix, written by the Wachowski brothers. After reading this, watch the movie and you will notice many similarities. In 2002, my brother ran into a problem with the IRS, and to help him out, I began to research the tax code. One thing led to another, and suddenly I was uncovering information about our government, which was directly in conflict with the U.S. Constitution, what I've been led to believe throughout my life. In time, I began to interface with people from every state in the Republic who were doing the same thing I was doing, some for the same reasons, others for different reasons. We began to trade our research, and the facts I uncovered was totally in contradiction to the history of America, which had been taught to us in public schools and the principles of law I'd absorbed during my service as a judge. I began to assist people to prepare and file suits in the courts, and I filed several of my own. At one point, because of the information I'm about to provide to you, I became extremely depressed. After about 3 months, I eventually shook it off and continued on with my research. My hope in writing this is to help you, the reader, make sense of it all, which will require you to wash your mind clean of the brainwashing you were subjected to by our government-controlled public schools and churches, and re-educate yourself. When you understand the actions, the reactions will make sense, and it should anger you. Eventually, you'll have a choice to make, a choice that will define how to survive life in the Matrix. In the Matrix, nothing is real. However, your mind has been conditioned to believe it is real. The Matrix is far too big to defeat. Remember that. No one can escape it, and we haven't the means or intelligence to beat those in control. Through my research, I discovered that America is a society of functional illiterates. I remind you that this is not my opinion, I'm just the messenger. And if you don't believe that America is a society of functional illiterates, go and read Quiet Weapons for Silent Wars. Energy. Energy is recognized as the key to all activity on Earth. Natural science is the study of the sources and control of natural energy, and social science, theoretically expressed in economics, is the study of the sources and control of social energy. Both are bookkeeping systems, mathematics. Therefore, mathematics is the primary energy science, and the bookkeeper can be the king if the public can be kept ignorant of the methodology of the bookkeeping. All science is merely a means to an end. The means is knowledge. The end is control. Beyond this remains only one issue: who will be the beneficiary? In 1954, this was the issue of primary concern. Although the so-called moral issues were raised in view of the law of natural selection, it was agreed that a nation or world of people who will not use their intelligence are no better than animals who do not have intelligence. Such people are beasts of burden and stakes on the table by choice and consent.
The mind is a terrible thing to waste.
Consequently, in the interest of future world order, peace and tranquility, it was decided to privately wage a quiet war against the American public with an ultimate objective of permanently shifting the natural and social energy, wealth, of the undisciplined and irresponsible many into the hands of the self-disciplined, responsible, and worthy few. In order to implement this objective, it was necessary to create secure and apply new weapons which, as it turned out, were a class of weapons so subtle and sophisticated in their principle of operation and public appearance as to earn for themselves the name silent weapons. In conclusion, the objective of economic research as conducted by the magnates of capital, banking, and the industries of commodities, goods, and services is the establishment of an economy which is totally predictable and manipulatable. In order to achieve a totally predictable economy, the low-class elements of society must be brought under total control. In other words, must be housebroken, trained and assigned a yoke and long-term social duties from a very early age before they have an opportunity to question the propriety of the matter. In order to achieve such conformity, the lower-class family unit must be disintegrated by a process of increasing preoccupation of the parents and the establishment of government-operated daycare centers for the occupationally orphaned children. The quality of education given to the lower class must be of the poorest sort, so that the moat of ignorance isolating the inferior class from the superior class is and remains incomprehensible to the inferior class. With such an initial handicap, even bright lower-class individuals have little, if any, hope of extricating themselves from their assigned lot in life. This form of slavery is essential to maintain some measure of social order, peace, and tranquility for the ruling upper class. Get on the internet and Google Charlotte Iserbyt. She was the head of the Department of Education. It's the dumbing down of America.
My name is Charlotte Thompson Iserbyt, and I served as Senior Policy Advisor in the United States Department of Education under the Reagan administration, during which I had access to all of the most important documents for the restructuring of not only American education, but global education. And I'm also the author of The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, which gets into all of this, gives the background of what I saw not only in the Department of Education, but as a local school board member. I was trained to identify the resistors to the sex ed, drug ed, alcohol ed, suicide ed, death ed, those good, smart Americans who realize that anything that has education hanging off the end of it is probably not what they're looking for. I was trained to identify those good people and to go up against them, and actually to go and try to get them to join us through the group process system, make them feel important, get them on a committee. And when that just blew my mind. I have to say, people often ask me, what is it that got you involved in education? Well, finding out what I saw at the local level certainly upset me. When I went and I saw that Americans were being trained to identify resistors, then I got pretty upset. And luckily, there was a big book that came with the in-service training called Innovations in Education, A Change Agent's Guide. And I was able to take that back home with me. Unbelievable examples of how to con the Christians and different people who are upset with what you're trying to do, how to bring them over to your side, case studies, true case studies of educators who had put programs in that normally, in a normal American town, nobody would want them. How did they manage to get them in? How did they con the people? And the other thing was, not only was I trained to identify the resistors, I was trained to go to the important people, high profile, highly thought of people in the community with the Rotary, Chamber of Commerce, Garden Club, you name it, the different groups in our towns. Go to them and convince them of the importance of these new programs like sex ed, drug ed, I just mentioned all of them, and to get them on your side, because when you can get the leadership in a community to go along with it, then the newspaper comes in and says, a committee's been set up with the head of the Rotary and this and that, and they're all getting behind this task force to discuss whether we're going to have a new sex education program. And then when Mary Jones, who ordinarily would think, why would we want to have a sex education program when we don't have any problems with kids having sex or anything? So she might be, concerned. She might be one of the resistors. She reads that her best friend, who's the head of the Garden Club, is on this committee, and she thinks, oh, well, hey, Mary Appleton is on that committee. She's heading it up. Must be okay. So I was taught really how to con the community.
and just go on social media and look how many people don't know how to capitalize a letter at the beginning of a sentence. The people in charge of the Matrix represent the most powerful and intelligent humans on Earth. When gifted children appear in the public schools of the world, they are courted with scholarships, money, and eventually memberships into secret societies. They'll be introduced to very persuasive intellectuals who will convince these young gifted people that this is their place and duty to be a part of the elite who rule the world's populations, because the rest of the world population are too stupid to make decisions for themselves. When the New World Order is officially and openly in control, only the extremely intelligent will be allowed to propagate. Everyone else will be sterilized or murdered through staged pandemics used to eliminate excessive populations.
Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge, a new era, freer from the threat of terror, stronger in the pursuit of justice, and more secure in the quest for peace. An era in which the nations of the world, East and West, North and South, can prosper and live in harmony. 100 generations have searched for this elusive path to peace, while 1,000 wars raged across the span of human endeavor. And today that new world is struggling to be born. A world quite different from the one we've known. A world where the rule of law supplants the rule of the jungle. A world in which nations recognize the shared responsibility for freedom and justice. A world where the strong respect the rights of the weak. We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order. A world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders. What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order, where diverse nations are drawn together in common cause to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind: peace and security, freedom, and the rule of law. Such is a world worthy of our struggle and worthy of our children's future. Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order. In the words of Winston Churchill, a world order in which the principles of justice and fair play protect the weak against the strong. A world where the United Nations, freed from Cold War stalemate, is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
We have to shape an international order that can meet the challenges of our generation. We will be steadfast in strengthening those old alliances that have served us so well, including those who will serve by your side in Afghanistan and around the globe. As influence extends to more countries and capitals, we also have to build new partnerships and shape stronger international standards and institutions. This engagement is not an end in itself. The international order we seek is one that can resolve the challenges of our times, countering violent extremism and insurgency, stopping the spread of nuclear weapons and securing nuclear materials, combating a changing climate and sustaining global growth, helping countries feed themselves and care for their sick, preventing conflict and healing wounds. If we are successful in these tasks, that will lessen conflicts around the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome it. This administration intends to be candid about its errors. For as a wise man once said, an error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We intend to accept full responsibility for our errors, and we expect you to point them out when we miss them. Without debate, without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. And that is why our press was protected by the First Amendment, the only business in America specifically protected by the Constitution, not primarily to amuse and entertain, not to emphasize the trivial and the sentimental, not to simply give the public what it wants, but to inform, to arouse, to reflect, to state our dangers and our opportunities, to indicate our crises and our choices, to lead, mold, educate, and sometimes even anger public opinion. This means greater coverage and analysis of international news, for it is no longer far away and foreign, but close at hand and local. It means greater attention to improved understanding of the news, as well as improved transmission. And it means, finally, that government at all levels must meet its obligation to provide you with the fullest possible information outside the narrowest limits of national security. And so it is to the printing press, to the recorder of man's deeds, the keeper of his conscience, the courier of his news, that we look for strength and assistance, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
Every foreign revolution, the world wars, the Depression, Prohibition, Korea, Vietnam, the Middle East conflict, and the influenza epidemic during World War I was planned and orchestrated by these people. Many early writers researched much of this history and were forced to fund their own publication and the distribution of their work. Most never received the acclaim they deserved and never knew our government was responsible for their failures. I'm prepared to supply anyone interested with mounds of research in support of what I've written herein. When I've conveyed parts of this information in court documents, the opposition's lawyers respond to their clients that I'm just crazy, and if the judge is within earshot of that comment, he will nod his head in judicial agreement. Well, I guess that caps it. If a lawyer and a lawyer judge both contend that I'm crazy, then I must be crazy. They wouldn't lie to you, or would they? And that's what happens to you today. You come into court and you present these things, the first thing they want to do is give you a psychological examination. They start calling you crazy. Go back and read the Anti-Federalist and the Federalist Papers. All right, the Anti-Federalists, you really need to read their books because that was basically the commoners and everything, the people who were free in all the states. And they understood what the Constitution represented. A lot of you people think the Constitution is this great document, and the more you're going to research it, the more you're going to find it's not the document that you think that it is. It's not the document that you think that it is. All right, you need to read the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist Papers. All right, and understand that the people who were the proponents of the Constitution, just about all of them were the rich and attorneys. Anti-Federalist number 1, general introduction. A dangerous plan of benefit only to the aristocratic combination. From the Boston Gazette and Country Journal, November 26, 1787. I am pleased to see a spirit of inquiry burst the band of constraint upon the subject of the new plan for consolidating the governments of the United States, as recommended by the late convention. If it is suitable to the genius and habits of the citizens of these states who will bear the strictest scrutiny, the people are the grand inquest who have a right to judge of its merit. The hideous demon of aristocracy has hitherto had so much influence as to bar the channels of investigation, preclude the people from inquiry, and extinguish every spark of liberal information of its qualities. At length, the luminary of intelligence begins to beam its effulgent rays upon this important production. The deceptive mist cast before the eyes of the people by the delusive machinations of its interested advocates begins to dissipate. As darkness flies before the burning taper, and I dare venture to predict that in spite of those mercenary deck tamers, the plan will have a candid and complete examination. Those furious zealots who are for cramming it down the throats of the people without allowing them either time or opportunity to scan or weigh it in the balance of their understandings bear the same marks in their features as those who have been long wishing to erect an aristocracy in this Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Their menacing cries for a rigid government. It matters little to them of what kind, provided it answers that description. As the plan now offered comes something near their wishes, and is the most consonant of their views of any they can hope for, they come boldly forward and demand its adoption. They brand with infamy every man who is not as determined and zealous in its favor as themselves. They cry aloud, the whole must be swallowed or none at all, thinking thereby to preclude any amendment. They are afraid of having it abated of its present rigid aspect. They strive to overawe or seduce printers to stifle and obstruct a free discussion, and have endeavored to hasten it to a decision before the people can duly reflect upon its properties. In order to deceive them, they incessantly declare that none can discover any defect in the system but bankrupts who wish no government, and officers of the present government who fear to lose a part of their power. These zealous partisans may injure their own cause and endanger the public tranquility by impeding a proper inquiry. The people may suspect the whole to be a dangerous plan from such covert and designing schemes to enforce it upon them. Compulsive or treacherous measures to establish any government whatever will always excite jealousy among a free people. Better remain single and alone than blindly adopt whatever a few individuals shall demand, be they ever so wise. I'd rather be a free citizen of the small Republic of Massachusetts than an oppressed subject of the great American Empire. Let all act understandingly or not at all. If we can confederate upon terms that will secure to us our liberties, it is an object highly desirable because of its additional security to the whole. If the proposed plan proves such an one, I hope it will be adopted, but it will endanger our liberties as it stands. Let it be amended, in order to which it must and ought to be often to inspection and free inquiry. The inundation of abuse that has been thrown upon the heads of those who have had any doubts of its universal good qualities have been so redundant that it may not be improper to scan the characters of its most strenuous advocates. It will first be allowed that many undesigning citizens may wish its adoption from the best motives, but these are modest and silent when compared to the great number who endeavor to suppress all attempts for investigation. These violent partisans are for having the people gulp down the gilded pill blindfolded, whole and without any qualification whatever. These consist generally of the noble order of Cincinnatus holders of public securities, men of great wealth and expectations of public office, bankers and lawyers, these with their train of dependents from their aristocratic combination. The lawyers in particular keep up an incessant declamation for its adoption. Like greedy gudgeons, they long to satiate the voracious stomachs with the golden bait. The numerous tribunals to be erected by the new plan of consolidated empire will find employment for 10 times the present numbers. These are the loaves and fishes for which they hunger. They will probably find it suited to their habits, if not to the habits of the people. There may be reasons for having them, few of them in the state convention, lest their interests should be too strongly considered. The time draws near for the choice of delegates. I hope my fellow citizens will look well to the characters of their preference and remember the old patriots of '75. They have never led them astray, nor need they fear to try them on this momentous occasion. The motive of our founding fathers was totally self-centered. It was their personal greed that inspired them to accept the task of writing the Constitution of the United States and not patriotism. Somebody says there's two constitutions. The second constitution is called a municipal constitution. You just go study municipal constitutions and look up the definition of constitution in a Black's Law dictionary under what is called parliamentary law. Parliamentary law. The body of rules and precedents governing the proceedings of legislative bodies and other deliberative assemblies, also termed parliamentary procedure. Thomas Jefferson speaks of the parliamentary branch of the law. From this country's beginning, it has been an underlying assumption of our culture that what has been authoritatively established as parliamentary law is law, in the sense of being binding within all assemblies, except as they may adopt special rules varying from the general parliamentary law. Henry M. Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, 26, 10th edition, 2000. Parliamentary law differs somewhat from the other branches of common law in that it is based in an important measure upon precedents of legislative and administrative bodies. Particularly in America, however, where the courts have the power to make final decisions on all constitutional questions, the law has been evolving upon the basis of court decisions, and a considerable volume of judicial precedents has accumulated. The application of parliamentary rules to new situations is subject to the same rules of reasoning as the application of established common law rules to new legal situations. National Conference on State Legislatures, Mason's Manual of Legislative Procedure, subsection 44, at pages 40 through 41, 2000. Constitution, Sense 4, Parliamentary Law. A governing document adopted by an organization for its internal governance and its external dealings. The Constitution may be an organization's most authoritative governing document, but if the organization has also received a charter or adopted articles of incorporation or association, then the Constitution is subordinate to them. If the organization has also adopted bylaws, then the bylaws are subordinate to, and usually more easily amended than, the Constitution. The Constitution and bylaws are sometimes contained in a single document. See governing document under document. Governing document, parliamentary law. A document that defines or organizes an organization, or grants or establishes its authority and governance. An organization's governing documents may include a charter, articles of incorporation or association, a constitution, bylaws, and rules. a charter or articles of incorporation or association, if they have been granted or adopted, are an organization's most authoritative governing document, followed by the Constitution, bylaws, and rules in that order, also termed document of authority. See Charter, subsection 4, Articles of Incorporation, Articles of Association, Constitution, bylaw, and subordination. Because this second U.S. government, or this corporate U.S. government, is the creation of Congress. All right, so you need to study things that are related to the legislature, and parliamentary law is dealing with the legislature. That's why you need to look at the definition of constitution in a Black's Law Dictionary under the 4 sense of the word, dealing with parliamentary law. Okay, and constitutions are documents that form corporations. Okay, and it's called a municipal constitution. You need to understand that. Municipal law is the only law where slavery exists. Dred Scott, plaintiff in error versus John F.A. Sanford. Supreme Court of the United States, December 1856 term. Slavery, being contrary to natural right, is created only by municipal law. This is not only plain in itself and agreed by all writers on the subject, but it's inferable from the Constitution and has been explicitly declared by this court. The Constitution refers to slaves as persons held to service in one state under the laws thereof. Nothing can be more clearly describe a status created by municipal law. In Priggs versus Pennsylvania, this court said, the state of slavery is deemed to be a mere municipal regulation founded on and limited to the range of territorial laws. The Supreme Court of Appeals of Kentucky said, slavery is sanctioned by the laws of this state, and the right to hold them under our municipal regulations is unquestionable, but we view this as a right existing by positive law of a municipal character, without foundation in the law of nature or the written common law. I am not acquainted with any case or writer questioning the correctness of this doctrine, where the authorities are collected. The status of slavery is not necessarily always attended with the same powers on the part of the master. The master is subject to the supreme power of the state, whose will controls his actions toward his slave, and his control must be defined and regulated by the municipal law. In one state, as at one period of the Roman law, it may put the life of the slave into the hand of the master. Others, as those of the United States, which tolerate slavery, may treat the slave as a person when the master takes his life, while in others, the law may recognize the right of the slave to be protected from cruel treatment. In other words, the status of slavery embraces every condition from that in which the slave is known to the law simply as a chattel, but no civil rights, to that in which he is recognized as a person for all purposes, save the compulsory power of directing and receiving the fruits of his labor. Which of these conditions shall attend the status of slavery must depend on the municipal law which creates and upholds it. And not only must the status of slavery be created and measured by municipal law, but the rights, powers, and obligations which grow out of that status must be defined, protected, and enforced by such laws. The liability of the master for the torts and crimes of his slave, and of third persons for assaulting or injuring or harboring or kidnapping him, the forms and modes of emancipation and sale, their subjection to the debts of the master, 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 succession by death of the master, suits for freedom, the capacity of the slave to be party to a suit or to be a witness, with such police regulations as have existed in all civilized states where slavery has been tolerated, are among the subjects upon which municipal legislation becomes necessary when slavery is introduced. For the offspring of the female must be governed by the foreign municipal laws to which the mother was subject. And when any slave is sold or passes by succession on the death of the owner, there must pass with him by species of subrogation and as a kind of unknown jus in re, the foreign municipal laws which constituted, regulated, and preserved the status of the slave before his exportation. Whatever theoretical importance may be now supposed to belong to the maintenance of such a right, I feel a perfect conviction that it would, if ever tried, prove to be as impracticable in fact as it is in my judgment monstrous in theory. You can read the Dred Scott case and find that out. It'll tell you that. And Priggs versus Pennsylvania. Priggs versus Pennsylvania is another good case for you to read where they explain all of this to you. Okay, and let me get back to the to what I was reading. I talk about the motives. Now, I would strongly suggest that you read the Anti-Federalist Papers and the Federalist Papers, all right, because this is what he's referencing right here. When you read that, you really have to understand what was going on during that time. And there wasn't really any reason to make the Constitution. People talk about the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation was too restrictive. They formed the Constitution because it gave them more powers. This is what gave rise to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, which gave birth to what's called the Implied Powers Doctrine. Implied powers of Congress. The elastic clause of the Constitution grants Congress power to pass unspecified laws necessary and proper for the exercise of its express powers. Implied powers have often been controversial. Over time, Congress's powers have grown as more and more kinds of government activity have been accepted as implied powers. This last power is enshrined in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, one of the most important and controversial clauses in the entire Constitution. This necessary and proper clause, sometimes also called the elastic clause, grants Congress a set of so-called implied powers, that is, powers not explicitly named in the Constitution, but assumed to exist due to their being necessary to implement the express powers that are named in Article 1. But what the heck does that mean exactly? We know that Congress has the power to regulate interstate commerce. It says so right there in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. But does Congress have the power to, say, make a rule setting a national minimum wage? Is that minimum wage law really necessary and proper for Congress to exercise its authority to regulate interstate commerce? Today, most people would say yes. We do have a national minimum wage law, and very few people now argue that the law should be considered unconstitutional. We interpret the Commerce Clause pretty loosely, assuming that Congress has the legitimate authority to pass all kinds of economic rules and regulations as a necessary and proper part of exercising its broad commercial powers. But this wasn't always the case. Throughout the late 19th century and well into the 1930s, the Supreme Court insisted that such laws were unconstitutional, that they were not a necessary and proper part of regulating interstate commerce at all, and thus the government had no right to enforce them. What changed? Not the Constitution, but our understanding of what's necessary and proper. Today simply isn't the same as what it was a century ago. Now you can see why Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18 is sometimes called the elastic clause. The definition of necessary and proper can be stretched pretty far in one direction or the other, depending upon the dominant political trends of the moment. And because the definition of necessary and proper is so subjective, the implied powers that derive from the necessary and proper clause have often been extremely controversial and subject to ferocious political disagreement. And this has been the case since at least George Washington's presidency, if not even before. You need to Google that. You need to Google it because a lot of people, and that's going to kill all that stuff people are talking about. Well, it's not enumerated. Where did government get the power to say this? It's called an implied power, fool. It's called implied power. Study the Constitution. Study constitutional law and stop watching these videos on YouTube. They don't know what the hell they're talking about.